Pennsylvania, the only state with forest in its name, is found in the crosshairs of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. This 46,000 square mile chunk of land is home to tens of thousands of species of plants and animals, and numerous geologic features. Even though 400 years of heavy human impact has altered the landscape, God's hand of the original creation can still be seen. During the third week of March, the sun returns to its position above the equator. 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night. Over the next 3 months, the land will transform from a frozen tundra to a resurrected forest full of life and color. Join us to witness the wild and natural wonders of Pennsylvania. The Arctic air is still upon much of the land, and the forest floor is still white, and the streams continue to remain icy. The highest elevations and latitudes won't fully thaw out until May. Eventually, the jet stream begins to fight to bring up warmer air from the south. The warm air clashes with the Arctic air, usually resulting in thunder snow, freezing rain, ice jams, and a few heavy snow showers. Little by little, the southern warmth overpowers the northern cold, warm enough to slowly melt away the ice and snow. The clashes continue, but trend even warmer as time passes, initiating the annual spring rains, which last 7 to 10 weeks. The rain and ice and snowmelt fills in slow draining natural depressions in the forest floor called vernal pools. Vernal pools come in all sizes, from a few square feet to several hundred or even thousands of square feet, all of which supports life crucial to our entire ecosystem. The first nocturnal rain, after most of the snow has melted, awakens an army that numbers more than the United States military. After waiting 6 months below the frost line, the yellow-spotted salamander emerges and immediately begins the most important journey of the year. The spotted salamander will travel up to a mile to the same pool it was born in. It would be equivalent to a human running 5.5 marathons, back-to-back over mountainous terrain, climbing over and under leaves, logs, and rocks, and more often in recent years, man-made obstacles, like roads. The patter of rain and songs of amphibians break the forest silence. The closer to the destination, the louder it becomes. After a grueling several-hour trek, the spotted salamanders enter the pool one after another. Some years, they are the first, and more often than not, the wood frogs and spring peepers beat them to it. Both frogs and salamanders enter the pool for the same purpose: to mate and to lay eggs. The male salamanders reach the pool first, and the females will enter after the second nocturnal spring rain. The males get to work by laying up the 80 balls of sperm, called spermatophores, on the debris at the bottom of the pool. It quickly turns into a competition of whose sperm will carry on the next generation. The spermatophores turn into towers, each male depositing his on top of the previous ones, for the females will only use what's on top. Before sunrise, the males exit the pool and disappear until next year, only coming out from cover to feed at night. The only evidence that they were there are the thousands of white dots at the bottom of the pool. During the second nocturnal rain, the larger females, growing up to 11 inches long, begin the same journey. Some males also show up, increasing their chances to be on top of the towers. The females pick up the top spermatophore with her cloaca, fertilizing the eggs inside of her. Within several hours to 2 days, she will lay her eggs. They stay underwater during the whole process except to get air every several minutes. Afterwards, she leaves before the sun comes up, or waits for the next night to leave. Vernal pools usually dry up during late spring and in the summer months, which protects the salamander eggs from fish. One of the few predators they do have are the eastern spotted newt. They enter the pools once the eggs are laid and feast. The adult's form of protection comes from the 2 rows of bright yellow dots. The bright spots warn potential predators of being toxic, though some creatures, such as snakes, will still eat the adults. The biggest predator of all is man. An estimated 200,000 spotted salamanders die each year as roadkill in Pennsylvania. Habitat loss and pollution, along with roadkills, decline the population by 3 to 5% each year. Though frogs and salamanders have eggs in the water at the same time, the difference is easy to tell. Salamander eggs have a protective gel that encapsulates the egg masses, whereas the frog eggs just stick together, forming a less protected mass. On average, the female will lay a clutch of 75 to 100 eggs in a mass, and up to 3 egg masses. Like all animals that birth in high numbers, mortality rate is high. 1 in 5 will live long enough to leave the pool, and 1 or 2 per mass will survive to adulthood. By 7 weeks, the eggs will hatch as tadpoles. And during the development stages, in the egg, you will notice that some have green algae on them. They form a symbiotic relationship. The algae takes the carbon dioxide, phosphorus, and nitrogen from the eggs and gives the eggs oxygen. And by July, if the pools haven't dried up, they will leave the pools only to return in 3 years once they are sexually mature. For the next 20 to 25 years afterwards, they remake the annual journey to the same vernal pool. As the temperatures trend even warmer, more and more critters awaken from their deep slumber to start preparations for the survival of the next winter. The forest becomes more alive each day. Most predators, like foxes, coyotes, and fishers, will be raising babies by early April. Many birds return from their vacation in the south, some traveling thousands of miles to return. The long silence of winter is broken with the songs of hundreds of thousands of birds. More than 400 species of birds call Pennsylvania home. Once arrived, they also prepare for the arrival of the next generation. In addition to all the ice and snow melt, the spring rains often flood the valleys. During the 3 months of spring, 9.6 trillion gallons of water fall from the sky. Enough rain to cover the whole state of Rhode Island with 30 feet of water. All the water swells the streams, some days 1,200% of their summertime volume. In some years, peak up to 3,000% of their summertime volume. Here, on the Youghiogheny River, during peak flow, the waterfall shrinks in height, but grows in ferocity. Every 4 3/4 seconds, 1 million gallons of H2O flow over the crest. With Pennsylvania's mountainous topography, all the water creates new waterfalls and enhances the ones already there. The tallest waterfall in a state only appears during a few weeks in spring and then disappears until next year. Water cascades down the near vertical gorge wall 380 feet into the raging river below. One of the few bird species that stayed through the winter begins their mating ritual, and the sound of love rings out. The North American turkey is one of the heaviest flying birds in the world, weighing up to 37 pounds. Males, known as gobblers or jakes if they are young, put on a dancing display to try to impress females. He'll call females in to watch by gobbling. Once the hens show up, the male will puff out his feathers and fan out his tail, making himself look as big as possible. The biggest and strongest males will get the mate more often. After mating, the female will find a nesting site on the forest floor, laying a clutch of 10 to 14 eggs, usually one per day. But unfortunately, in the world of survival, ground nests are easy targets. Turkey eggs are often sought after by predators, such as bobcats, fishers, raccoons, possums, skunks, foxes, and others. Another bird starts their mating ritual. The ruffed grouse, a rare sight nowadays, as their population is merely 30% of what it was 20 years ago, due to overhunting, habitat loss, and disease. Here, a male does what's known as drumming to attract females. During late March and early April, plants and flowers begin to pop up from the forest floor, a sure sign that spring is underway. Some of the most notable species include trilliums, trout lilies, spring beauty, Dutchman's breeches, and nearly 24 species of violets. Overall, during the spring, more than 1,000 species of wildflower will bloom. Here, in a section of forest that experienced a wildfire the previous year, shows new life. Even though it seemed as if it were a total loss, life finds a way, and new life at that. One of the rarer species of wildflower in Appalachia is a lady slipper. The wildfire changed the soil and created new gaps in the canopy, allowing sunlight to penetrate the ground, creating new conditions for these plants that haven't been here at this specific spot in recorded history. Not only are there pink lady slippers, but its rarer relative, the yellow lady slipper, has also made an appearance. Wildflowers are a keystone element in our ecosystem, and in all ecosystems around the world, providing food for our pollinators, such as honeybees, hummingbird, and thousands of insects. Some pollinators depend on just a handful of species of wildflowers, like the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly and other butterfly and moth species wholly depend on milkweed during the summer. Native wildflowers are unique to each climate and microclimate and are very delicate. If every visitor picked one wildflower in our parks and forests, we'd be in major trouble and the land would be devastated. Along with all the wildflowers, fungi begin to grow. Once the ground temperature reaches 53 degrees Fahrenheit, the morel mushrooms will begin to pop up. This honeycomb-shaped fungus is highly sought after for cooking in households and gourmet restaurants. Their growing season is only a few weeks a year and can easily grow an inch in height per day under favorable conditions. Other spring mushrooms include pheasant backs, turkey tails, and oysters, all of which have been used for medicinal and culinary purposes for centuries. By the end of May, the trees will have begun to flower, and shortly thereafter grow leaves. The new growth and flowers of some trees can easily be picked out of a crowd, such as dogwood, redbud, and apple trees. All the energy for the new growth calls for a lot of water. Pennsylvania's trees alone during spring will drink and store 297.5 billion gallons per day, nearly 4.5 times the amount of water that flows over Niagara Falls in a day. Given the right conditions, the valleys will go from bare to green within a week. The passing from death to life, a resurrection. Ducks and geese at this time sit on their nest regulating the temperature of their eggs and protecting the ones that have already hatched. Geese are very territorial and protective of their young'uns. Their nesting sites are found on the banks and islands of streams and lakes. Male geese will also stand guard to protect the nest. In just a day or two after hatching, the fluffy yellow goslings leave the nest to the safety of shallow, slow-moving water, already knowing how to swim and dive. There, they feed on aquatic bugs and plants. For the rest of the year, they stay with their mother. A month and a half to 2 months after hatching, ducklings have grown and developed to the point of independency and will fly off to start a life of their own. White-tailed deer typically give birth Memorial Day weekend in the higher elevations, and 10 to 20 days beforehand in the warmer parts of the state. Finding tall weeds or thick underbrush, mom gives birth to 1 to 3 6 to 8 pound babies called fawns. It is born light brown with several rows of white dots. Within an hour of birth, the newborn, albeit wobbly, is able to walk, but it doesn't stray far from mom. The mother commonly leaves the fawns for several reasons: to lure potential predators away from her babies, to go eat and drink, and sometimes for a little break. The fawn will silently stay put until mom returns in order to nurse, which it does at least 4 times a day. For the first 10 days or so, the fawn is scentless, unable to be detected by predators. Afterwards, they develop a scent and are vulnerable. They quickly become agile, quick, and strong, but are still dependent on their mother. At 2 weeks old, the fawn will begin to diversify its diet, adding plants to its menu, and they begin to explore the wilderness with mom. Deer are empathetic and mourn the loss of a fellow deer. Here, a mother passes by the remains of her 1-month-old baby, killed by a fisher. Other predators of baby deer include coyotes, foxes, bobcat, and bear. Other deer also show up to the gravesite. The surviving fawns typically hang around the mother until the following year's rut season in the fall. April and May are active months for solar activity. When the 11-year solar cycle is most active, solar storms are strong enough to push the aurora down to Pennsylvania. Hues of green, pink, red, and purple light up the night sky and dance. For the past several years, we've also had several solar and lunar eclipses. By mid-June, all the trees in Pennsylvania now have full-sized leaves. The bright, light green hues of the hills, mountains, and valleys have changed into dark green. The rains begin to become less frequent, and the temperatures continue to rise. The eastern part of the state and the deep valleys of the rest of the state have already experienced at least one day in the 90s. Vernal pools and water holes shrink and evaporate. The cool mountain streams become the lifeline most relied upon by the majority of all creatures. Animals become more nocturnal to escape the heat of the day, and plants and trees rely on thunderstorms to water their fruit. Every season has its challenges, yet life prevails by design.